this off. Mexico, Minneapolis, Brooklyn, Barcelona, London. Okay, awesome. Great to see you all. Thanks so much for joining. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll keep letting people in off the list here. So welcome. This is our latest in a continuing series of events that we call our AI Real Talk series. So we are trying to get beyond the hype and ask, interesting, provocative questions of the people building the AI technologies that are reshaping how media works, how people consume media, how people create media. I'm really happy to have Will Allen here from Cloudflare, who is the VP of product there. And we'll talk briefly about him shortly. I also want to thank the MacArthur Foundation, who is supporting us for this series and other projects that we do. Please sign up at our website, hackshackers.org, to find out about all sorts of events that we're doing now and in the future. A lot of you we met at the AI Summit we had in Baltimore in May. We hope to see you there again. We'll be announcing some other events shortly. Yeah, and great to see you all there. I will get out of my screen share and go ahead and introduce Will Allen. So Will works on some interesting initiatives at Cloudflare, namely the one that we're going to talk about today, Paper Crawl, and he's going to dive into more of an explanation of what that is. I also want to point out it's very interesting that his background before Cloudflare was spending quite a while at Adobe, where he worked on the C2PA. So this is the Content Authenticity Initiative. So this is also something that has come up a lot in various journalist circles about how do you validate, that images are actually taken by real people and document like the chain of what happens if they're edited and all that. Obviously, this is becoming yet more crucial in the age of AI, especially when we now have entire social networks filled with purely AI generated material, which I wanted to put one in my opening today, but it was very annoying that I could not get the sound work. I had a whole musical generated by Sora about hacks and hackers singing in harmony. Anyway, but was unfortunately like flummoxed by Zoom and not sharing audio properly. Anyway, but with that, I want to toss it to Will. Will is going to share some slides to just kind of give the basics on Cloudflare in general and also what they're talking about with this AI kind of AI crawl control or paper call, whatever it's going by. And then we'll have some questions. I'll kind of ask him some questions, and I'll definitely open it up to all of you to ask questions, put them in the chat, and potentially let you unmute and ask them, so we break up all our monotonous voices. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Will to talk about Cloudflare and all the stuff that they're working on.
Amazing, Bert. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for being here, for inviting me to talk. And I will keep this first part very brief because I always find these discussions to be most interesting when they're actually a discussion and you can ask questions and we can sort of go into detail. Um, for those of you who don't know Cloudflare, we do a lot of different things in the security, internet standard space, but sort of the way to think about us very broadly, really for this conversation is we help get your request to go to a particular website or app or API or internet connected service and help route that request and fulfill it safely and securely. So we help protect some of the world's largest enterprises from massive DDoS attacks and do what's called sort of a CDN in this core aspect and bot management. So if you're running a website, whether it's a free site, a very small one like willisguitars.com or the largest of large enterprises, we think you should be able to put that website online and have it be protected from large DDoS attacks, be protected from bots, and get to your users, whoever you define your users as quickly and securely and as cost effectively as possible. So that's sort of like the core part of what Cloudflare does for the purposes of this conversation. So when we think about like what you all are doing, there's an entirely different world that you all are living. And think about sort of like some of the consumer experiences you might have had this morning and over the weekend. A couple of years ago, you would go and go to your favorite search engine. You would type in your query, and then you would sort of go off, follow the query off to whatever website that had the answer for it, right? And so all of our experiences in sort of the internet were built on this sort of unspoken agreement, which is I put my content online, it gets scanned and ingested by every search crawler, every AI, or sort of every like content indexer, and anyone else out there. And in return, I get something. Now, that something might be referral traffic on the way back. It might be just attribution, so the world knew what I did. And if it is that referral traffic, I could monetize it in some way, shape, or form. Again, maybe it's just for my ego to know that people came and discovered that I created this thing. But maybe it's actually referral traffic that I can monetize via ads, via subscriptions, via brand recognition. And that was the agreement. Here's my content, scan it, ingest it, do something with it, send me referral traffic back. Obviously, the world has dramatically changed in the past 3 years. We've gone from search engines to answer engines. I think again about my past weekend. I was asking ChatGPT for all sorts of like, fixing random things around my house. I didn't go off to any websites when I was doing this. I was in sort of the singular consumer experience of chat, of Gemini, of Claude, or pick your favorite sort of AI application, and I didn't go back to the original source. Now, maybe that's okay and are great for me as a consumer. It's incredibly challenging for content creators, for news organizations, for journalism, for people who sort of have historically relied upon that referral traffic to come back to them. You can see how this is actually changing in the numbers, not only sort of our personal experience. We call this sort of like a crawl to referral ratio, which is how many times does your content get ingested or crawled by some of the larger companies, and sort of what's the ratio of how many referrers, how many people are they sending back to your website? 10 years ago, Google would crawl your site, twice for every one visitor that they sent you, and people built entire businesses and industries around that. Today, that ratio hovers around something like 18 to 1. And if you look at others, the ratio is sort of astronomically different, where there's a large amount of content being ingested and not much referral traffic coming back. That can be incredibly challenging, again, as you all know better than anyone, for your business. What we think of when we sort of work with publishers and news organizations and content creators is really say you want to do three things. First and foremost, you want to audit, understand what's happening with your content. What are the bots? What are the crawlers that are accessing your content? So just give you the data, first and foremost. So that's one thing that we help you do. We route roughly 20% of the internet sort of gets routed through us. We see an absolutely enormous amount of data. So we help our customers and users sort of not only understand what's happening with their content, but then sort of benchmark it against their peers and against sort of the broader internet. So that first step, what we think of for publishers, is just to audit, understand what's going on. The second one is for you to define your core policies. People have different philosophies about what they want to do. Some want to write for the super intelligence. They want all of their content to be ingested and included in every foundation model and included in every sort of test time compute. Some want to write for human eyes only. Some would happily allow crawlers to access their content if they get paid. Whatever your policies are, we're like our role in this is to help support you, is to give you as the publisher, the website operator, the controls and the ability to decide who you want to let through and who you want to block. But the actual policy is set by you. So the second step is sort of this define your policies, and then enforce. We help you enforce it. If you say, hey, I've got to deal with, for example, OpenAI, and I don't have a deal with Anthropic or vice versa, we can help you allow that one crawler through and block the other. Or if you say, hey, Byte Spider's doing a large amount of ingesting, I want to block them, great, we help you do that. If you aren't sure yet, and you want to set up sort of this ability to charge the long tail, great, we help you do that. So really think about us as sort of like that first and third step here, the audit side and then the enforce side, actually sort of enforcing your policies and making those happen. We can do this because we're a global network. We have, servers and computers in literally 330 plus countries. Again, 20% of the web gets routed through us. Actually, an incredible user base from Gen AI companies themselves, which again helps us put us in sort of this unique position to help create this new equilibrium, this new balance, we think, between sort of content creators and AI companies. And we do this in massive, massive scale. We've thought about, DDoS mitigation since our founding over 15 years ago. Crawlers are a different form of bot, and it's another one that we sort of help think about and to help work. This is a little bit of like the technical details about how it works. We can go into this if you all would like, but no need to for this conversation. But again, we think about sort of every request to your web property. We help give you a score, help you identify who the crawler is, help you identify if it's a mass data scraper that's trying to pretend to be somebody else, and then help you enforce that policy, whatever your policy might be. And that's it. I'm actually gonna stop there. It's sort of like the incredibly rapid fire overview of what we're doing here. But sort of like the key takeaways again would be you as the content creator should be in the driver's seat for how your content gets accessed and what can happen to that content. And we want to help give you the tools and the resources available to make those decisions and then enforce those decisions for you. So, Bert, that's sort of my quick overview, and would love to go into any questions you all might have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to kick it off with some questions, and then we'll open it up. Yeah. So that's really interesting, and yeah, you do have a very critical role in the internet, obviously, being kind of a gatekeeper, normally helping with the distributed denial of service attacks, but in some ways, I guess bots kind of could look like the same thing potentially, right?
Yes.
Makes sense that you can kind of use the infrastructure for both things. I I guess I'm wondering, like, now that all these foundational models have been trained, or like the internet has already been copied and uploaded and whatever into their servers, like, is it too late? Like, is the whatever the horse out of the barn or whatever? Like, can you put the genie back in the bottle? Like, does it even matter to block this anymore? Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I can think about sort of like the two, incredibly sort of simplistic terms, which just doesn't completely comport to reality. But you can sort of think about like the pre-training or training side of a foundation model, and then you can think of sort of the inference or the sort of the actual sort of what's happening today part of the model. On the former, about what is included in sort of the training catalog for large foundation models, the assumption anyone should make is that if it was connected to the internet, it is in those models, just broadly speaking. And I think most folks at the larger foundation model companies have sort of spoken about this, and that they quote unquote train on the internet. And so that is done, right? So like, are there things you can do, to mitigate that impact? Maybe sort of beyond sort of the purview of what I'm able to help with, but sort of the content up until today or up until a lot of enforcement happened, for the most part is in there. But the latter, I think, is actually where most of the value in new content will come from. Again, think about this weekend. I was watching some Major League Baseball with my kids, and if I want to know like what's happening today with how badly were the Yankees beaten, over the weekend. That information is, not in any sort of free trading model because it's just happening. It's real-time information about the world that's happening around us, new analysis, new facts, new content that gets generated. That has an enormous and incredible value. So kind of think about it as two aspects. The training side, probably been done. You can stop future parts of it by sort of enforcing your preferences, but really it's sort of like the inference. People call it RAG, retrieval augmented generation. It goes by sort of a lot of different names, but like just imagine you're asking your favorite sort of chatbot, what's happening with X, Y, and Z topic, though they are now competing on highly relevant, new, interesting information that fits that. Whether you're shopping, whether you're looking for what's happening in a particular jurisdiction, whether you're looking for sports analysis, all those things are about sort of new aspects. And I think there's enormous value there for content creators to be able to take control of that part of their content before it gets into sort of the latest model.
Okay, and it does seem like you have changed the branding on this product, right? Like, what is it called now, according to your slides?
Yeah, we call it AI crawl control. It was
Oh,
AI audit when we sort of launched
yeah.
this about a year ago.
Was a pay per crawl. Wasn't that what, I mean, I guess the pay thing really caught people's attention. They're like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna get
yeah.
money. Is that still part of the plan here? Like, are you trying to set up a marketplace where people,
100%.
okay,
100%. And the reason so Paper Crawl is a product that we have and it's in private beta with a certain number of people. AI Crawl Control is a dashboard that any Cloudflare user, we have millions upon millions of free users up to the largest of large enterprises, everyone gets access to this. And this gives you the ability to sort of quickly look at your web property or connected property and see what's the traffic coming through, what are the top crawlers coming through, and do I want to allow them or block them? So do I want to, for example, ByteSpider, allow it or block it? GPT bot, allow it or block it. That's available to everyone across the board. And what we know again from talking to folks like yourselves is that you want to first and foremost get that data, get that understanding. And then the actions part is sort of what's next. Do I want to have this sort of binary option of allowing or disallowing, allowing or blocking, or a third option of charging, of saying, hey, I'm perfectly fine with a data scraper coming to my site or a ByteSpider or a Claude bot coming to my site, but I want to get paid for it. And so we've set up a private beta new product. We launched it July 1st. It's called Paper Crawl, is an additional feature inside of AI crawl control. And that allows you to say, not only I want to block this crawler or allow this crawler, I actually want to charge them. And you can sort of set your price and say, every time you access this particular page on my site, it's going to be whatever, 5 cents, $5, $50, $500. You set your own price. And then you send a response out to that crawler. It says, hey, you cannot access this content unless you pay. And we think I can sort of talk about the mechanics of that.
Paid? Like, is that actually happening? I guess, can you say how much money has been paid out as a result of that beta or
It's
any?
still really early. What I can say, and the reason I think it's early is because we're trying to build an entirely new mechanism for payment on the internet that doesn't require people to pick up a phone and, read off their credit card number that's out there. So we're still really early on the paper crawl side and just beginning to experiment with it there. What I
So what
can
does
say
that mean?
is that one.
Oh, what, how, I guess, how do you, I guess, how do you even set up that payment to happen so seamlessly, right? It implies that the bots would have to like sign up in some
Yes.
dashboard, right? To create the link where they could then
Yes.
charge for crawling sites, right? I mean,
Yes, exactly. So we've built an entire sort of handshake mechanism for an agent for a crawler to come through and say they get a particular response from us. What we allow our customers to do is to send out what's called an HTTP 402 response, and that's sort of part of the internet standards. And it basically says payment required for this content. And so what that means is you cannot get this content unless there's some sort of payment attached to it. Every day, Cloudflare users, Cloudflare customers are sending out 1 billion 402 responses out to the world. So it's 1 billion responses out saying, you are blocked from getting this content unless there's some sort of payment required. That to us is the most interesting part of this because it tells the world that it's not a blanket no. It's not a no, I don't want you to have access to this content ever. It's a yes if that like, yes, we would love for every AI company to have access to this content. We'd love for it to be in your inference, but there needs to be some sort of deal here. There needs to be some sort of payment mechanism. We're hearing from a lot of the larger sort of news organizations that we work with and publishers that they're, getting very aggressive with sort of their content controls, sending out these 402 responses, and then they are doing direct deals. And we're seeing very positive impact happening there with those sort of direct deals. What I work on the paper crawl side is not only to help people with the enforcement side of it, but then sort of think about sort of internet scale across the board. How can we allow somebody building an agent, a foundation model to say, oh, I want this particular piece of content just this once because it's relevant to my user today. How do we enable seamless payments? And that's what I say, like it's very early in the paper crawl side, is because that sort of agentic payment, that sort of like internet level payments is going to take a little while to build. And we're doing it sort of ourselves with our sort of key publisher partners and key agent developers right there. But the
well, that
bigger
makes,
picture here is
yeah.
that there's
Sure.
an incredible amount of interest in sort of building some sort of new deal or new economic model.
The 402 code. I had to, yeah, that's this mythical code that was created at the dawn
Yes,
of the web, right? That is like payment required. Which,
yes.
if only they had implemented it as an actual standard, right? But it's not technically part of the HTTP standard, is it? Or
It's basically reserved for future use. So it's not fully out there and being used, but it's recognized by, anyone that's out there. We actually last week or maybe 2 weeks ago now, we announced a partnership with Coinbase to set up a new foundation to help build a new standard around this. It's called X402. Coinbase created this new framework or protocol for receiving internet level payments, and we are working with them to set up a foundation to actually take that protocol and push it ultimately into some sort of internet standard to get it out there. Everyone recognizes these 402 responses. It's sort of like this sleepy part of the internet protocol. What needs to happen is that next step of standardization and sort of like mass adoption of the protocol. So that's what we're working on because we do think there needs to be sort of internet native rails or payment rails to get access to this content that hasn't happened in the past. There will continue, of course, to be one-off deals with your, chief revenue officers and BD teams. That will, of course, continue to happen. But we think so much gets unlocked if we're able to sort of do this at internet scale without having to talk to another human all the time.
yeah. No, I was going to say crypto, but yeah, so there you go. You're working with Coinbase. Okay, to do
But
like,
it could be regular. I mean, it works with Visa,
right.
works with MasterCard. Like the idea is that it's just that's sort of the handshake of like, hey, payment required for this piece of content. Yes, I'm willing to pay. Great, charge me this thing. And that can be done with traditional payment rails and credit card networks and ACH in addition to stablecoins. So it's sort of an all of the above. The key mechanism there that we're working on is to make sure that that actual response of here's a piece of content or here's an API I want you to access and here's how to pay for it to make sure that is standardized in a way that anyone can recognize.
Okay. Yeah, I have a bunch of questions off of that. I guess first of all, like there is a question about open standards, right? And some people have expressed concern that Cloudflare is a private company, and it's true that yes, like you said, 20% of the internet, like a massive amount of traffic does pass through your servers. But how do we prevent this from becoming yet another gatekeeper, yet another, now we're going to have to, talk to Cloudflare and appeal to Cloudflare if they're blocking things or whatever. And I know this has been an issue in the past with content moderation kind of decisions that Cloudflare has had to face. Yeah, what are you working to create an open standard out of this? It sounds like potentially, but yeah, could you talk to me?
Yes, 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 yes. So a couple of key things. One here is that we're incredibly active in, existing standard bodies that are out there. One important aspect of how do I know that a crawler that's coming to my website is actually from, say, this foundation model company versus somebody trying to pretend to be them. We sort of created the first proposal. We call it WebBot Auth. That, and we immediately put that into the IETF, which is a standards body that's out there. So we are actively pushing open standards for the ability to sort of identify an agent or a crawler that sort of moves beyond the existing mechanisms like IP address and reverse DNS, which have some, scalability challenges. And so WebBot Auth is one open standard that sort of we created, and we're out there pushing that forward. And what's amazing to see, OpenAI's agent has adopted that. We're working with actually remote browsing companies like BrowserBase, who's exploring implementing this. So it's a classic example of we knew there needed to be a standard. Our incredible research team sort of built, the first proposal, and then they put it forward into an existing standards body to get it out there. A similar thing's happening with X402 with us with Coinbase. Coinbase created this new protocol. They released it under an open source license. We said that's an amazing product. We'd love to integrate it because we've got so many people using these 402 responses. But how do we take that from an open source project into moving it towards a standard? So that's where we announced sort of our intention to create the X402 Foundation, which will be sort of moving towards that standards body. So lots of standards work happening across the board, which I think is really important and critical for this. There's a second answer though here, which is that our customers are in the driver's seat to decide what to do. So some customers say, I want every AI company to be scanning everything I do because it's critical for my, moving from SEO to the new world of SEO, whatever you might call it. I want to be in every response from Claude, from Gemini, from ChatGPT. And they're asking us to help accelerate their ingestion into there. Some are saying, I want to block all of those. Great. Some were somewhere in between. Great. In each of those scenarios, we were just providing the tools for the website operator to actually enforce their preferences. It's not us making the call, it's them, right? And so if I'm willsguitars.com and I'm saying, hey, I want to block this crawler, we give them the tools to do that. It's not Cloudflare blocking on their behalf. It's not us making that decision. It's them making the decision and us helping them actually enforce that decision. So we think it's a really critical part of this. We aren't the decision maker. We're building the tools for the individual publisher or news organization or content creator to make their calls. And so that's a critical part of how we think about this world.
How do you, I mean, what if people just keep switching, IP addresses and switch the names of their bots and use different things
Yes.
than their other bots that have been authorized and whatever? Like, well, you have a bot authorization. You did mention that thing as one
Yes.
potential solution, but yeah, how do you stop the truly bad actors? Like, and how, I guess, how do you leverage the experience you have from stopping like government bad actors and other people from
Yes.
attacking sites?
It's pretty similar, and we think about this as like how do you build a virtuous cycle, right? And so how do you build an ability to where people who are self-declaring their crawler and saying, "Hey, this is me. I'm out there, ingesting content from the internet to train my model or to do search, and I'm identifying myself. How do we make their lives better and easier and make it harder for the people who are trying to obscure who they are and try to hide and just sort of mass data scrape and steal when they're trying to sort of obscure their behavior? The virtuous cycle is about this web bot auth. It's about sort of IP verification. It's about um, amplifying folks that are sort of doing that self-identification. We think that's really critical. Once you are off that sort of happy path of saying, hey, this is my crawler, here's what I'm doing, you look like a bot. And you just like that request then looks like a bot because we see so much data, again, 20% of the internet sort of getting routed through us, we can then map that bot activity across not just one particular site, but millions and millions and millions of different sites. It allows us to say, hey, wait a second, this request that's coming through, it looks like the same data scraper that's trying to access this site, this site, this site, this site, this site. And then we just give you, the website operator, the publisher, the tools. You might say, you want if it looks like a bot and it's looking like a data scraper, just block them, right? I just want to block them full out. And then you could say, I want to block all of those that are self-identifying. And then you then as the publisher have sort of these granular controls to say, I want to allow those that are self-identifying and block those who are self-identifying that I don't want to have. You can have full control. But when they fall off that path of identifying, they look like a bot, and you get to decide what to do with bot traffic. You can throw up what we call our turnstile, which is sort of a JavaScript challenge, just to trip it up to make sure there's actually a human behind the wheel, to give you that sort of granular control from there. Because it's a big challenge. So it's a big challenge for a lot of website operators, but our goal is to give you the tools to make those decisions.
And this is not just like robots.txt files that are be like, oh, be nice, look at our rules, please follow them, thank you. But you can just totally ignore it. Like you are actively doing things that would
Correct.
there's something about sending AIs down like infinite mazes to just confuse them, right?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah, I think of your robots.txt file as like the code of conduct, and it's like, please be respectful and please do these things, and the good actors will, pay attention to it, and the bad actors will pretend like it doesn't exist. And so it's still a good thing to have out there for the good actors to tell them what to do, but it's got to be a yes and. You both need sort of the code of conduct, and you need somebody at the door checking IDs on your behalf, or somebody up there at the front, running the cash register to make sure people actually pay on their way out. It's another really critical part of this. And so we think that those two aspects work really well together.
I guess I'm wondering from because you worked at Adobe on C2PA, I mean that is like a standard that it is an open standard, but yet
Hmm.
I haven't seen it like we've been talking about that for years too, but it hasn't yet become like it's in your iPhone where any time you take a picture it gets encoded with C2PA. That does not happen now. I think I just saw one recently, a camera from Nikon or Canon, I can't remember who has C2P. Like it's been very slow to get that to be built into things. Like I guess how does what do you take from that experience that you would apply to this work you're doing now? I'm just curious how these things connect as you think about your work today.
Yeah, we started the C2PA in 2019. So, my former hat, I was at Adobe, started this thing called the Content Authenticity Initiative, and we knew immediately that we needed to have a standards body to sort of push forward the technical, specifications. So we and Microsoft set up the C2PA. It's got many, many members now. It's, some of our former, mutual friends are still there running it. I stay in close contact with them because I just am passionate about what they're doing. I learned a lot from that experience. First, what it takes to stand up a standards body. I hadn't done that, prior to then, which is a pretty interesting experience. It takes a long time to implement these things. I would say just there's a massive amount of credit to the core teams at Adobe and Microsoft and Google actually is an incredible supporter of it as well for pushing these forward. It's not in the iPhone, but it's in the Pixel. The latest Google phone just came out, and they just said like every photo taken with the latest Google phone has those content, you can shorthand call them content credentials or C2PA metadata attached to that particular image. That is a monumental update for that. Now, it's not big and sort of out in the as much of the press as I think it should be. Incredibly important. So you're seeing major camera manufacturers like Nikon and Leica, I believe Canon, the Google phone now implementing it. We implemented it at Cloudflare to sort of make sure if you're using sort of our images product, you can maintain those content credentials. OpenAI has implemented it in their image gen product. So every image generated on chat includes the C2PA metadata as well. And so there's a lot of work that's happening around it. It hasn't broken through, I'd say, to like the common consciousness yet. So there's still more work to be done, but so many of the pieces continue to come into place. And look, I, like many of you, was just blown away by the caliber and the quality of things like Nano Banana from Gemini and Sora for the last couple of weeks. And so I think the world continues to recognize there's a real need here for it. So slow but steady progress. The world's coming around to it. I think the same thing's going to happen here when I think about sort of web bot auth, and how do you think about bots and how do you think about this new world of agent-driven commerce and agent-driven content access. The world is recognizing there's a need for it. A lot of companies, not just us, certainly many companies are out pushing forward new standards and ways to work on this. It might take a little while, but I think we aren't waiting. We're trying to build products that are useful today, to get in the hands of our customers.
Okay, yes. Speaking of that, I guess Danya had a question from Philly. If you want to unmute and ask, yeah, about human generated content. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. This has been so informative. Um, do you think that there's if when we're building out this market, is there a room for like, would the LLMs or the chatbots pay more for content that they can prove is human verified? Because we've all heard, or I've heard about chasing its own tail and the LLMs and just LLM stuff. I don't know if that's really true for, I think that's training, that's not for RAG, but you would think that like, if it's human generated, that's what they want to serve. And I'm wondering if there is room in the in the marketplace for that.
I think so. I wouldn't quite call it like just human versus AI generated. Again, if I put on sort of my old Adobe hat, I think about so much of what you do in Photoshop or Premiere Pro. I always called it sort of AI infused. And so how much you create things is like, if you're using, uh, a spell checker, is that like AI generated? No, but like we sort of like come to accept that. But it was like pretty revolutionary when it first came out. And so I think we're continually moving down that path. But the quality content that matters to readers, I think, is really important. And if I think about building a consumer experience or an enterprise experience as a company that's either building foundation models or sort of more AI-driven products, and my users are asking questions or doing something, I'm going to want the best, most up-to-date information. If I'm creating a AI that's about sort of legal analysis, I need to make sure it's really high quality. I don't want to sort of have my, customers then going in front of a judge and having them realizing the footnotes were hallucinated or it was based on some case law that doesn't even exist. That would be catastrophic for the business and catastrophic for the person practicing. That's true in healthcare. It's true in sports. It's true in so many different things. So I think there is a real premium on quality content. And I think that the companies that recognize that, who are building these AI experiences, will have a deep and enduring competitive advantage. And so a lot of what we think about is how do we enable the people who are creating that content, to protect it, and to make sure that they can set their price and to create the marketplace that works for them.
Chad, I know you had a couple of questions. I might have already asked one about the open protocols thing, but do you want to unmute and ask something else?
Sure. I was just basically posting in there about AI prefs at IETF, and I mean
Yes.
Mark Nottingham's work there. And you answered by saying like the webbot auth is something that I hadn't seen before, and it really just comes down to like once again like what Bert said about we need to protocolize this so we don't end up with another gatekeeper. I do think you probably answered most of that, but if you have any other commentary on that, I'd be happy to hear.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important working group at the IATF. It's about sort of using robots.txt to express your preferences for how your content is being used. I wrote a blog post about this last week, 2 weeks ago, introducing the policy, sort of like a first step towards this. I called it the content signals policy. The idea there is, we don't think you should have to fully close off access to the open web to express your preferences for how your content's being used. So today, if you want to sort of like have your content sort of both be accessible by anyone. That a lot of beta scrapers out there saying like, okay, great, that means I can access it and I can train on it and I can do whatever I want to with it. The AI Prefs working group has been working for, I think, over a year at this time to try to help set a standard to say that like, hey, open access to this thing, but it doesn't mean you could use it for commercial purposes in these other areas. Here's my preferences for how what I would like. Like, yes, it's fine for you to train on it, or no, it's you cannot train on it, et cetera. So that's an incredibly important working group. We've set forward proposals for that. And we've got people who attended the last meeting in Zurich last week, and we think about it a lot. So incredibly important work happening there, more work happening in more places. But the idea is that you want to have in all these cases sort of your code of conduct that you sort of put on the wall of like, here's my actual preferences for what I want to do, and then pair that with enforcement of like actual like allowing, disallowing, and or blocking or charging at the network level. We think that's the right sort of belt and suspenders approach to that problem.
Hiawatha, you had a question about attribution.
Yeah, I did. You kind of brushed on it earlier with this kind of Google Zero world we're entering in. A lot of anxiety around just sort of mass scraping and loss of provenance of where all this information is coming from. So just wondering in this payment ecosystem, how sort of those signals, and I think Danya probably talked a little bit about it with, is this even a human information? Like, how do we define quality content? How do we define trust? And do those signals flow into this ecosystem?
I think they have to flow into it. And that's the easy part. The hard part is actually how do you actually build those signals in? I mean, I wish I had some like incredible technical innovation here to offer you. Mostly I recognize that it's incredibly challenging. And weirdly, I think, again, putting on sort of my old hat of working on the C2PA and content provenance, weirdly, images and video were actually easier in this context, right? Sort of you can tell that like if I took a photo with my Google phone or an icon and I pulled it into Lightroom or Photoshop, did some editing, put it on my website that's using Cloudflare, I could trace that provenance all the way through. I sold access to it. And you could sort of like bake in that provenance access, that provenance data into the payment rails, and that actually can like is a nice ecosystem that all works together. Text is actually really hard in that in that context, because how do you say that like this idea came from this person, or this new text is AI generated? How do you sort of map it? There are people who are working on this, which I think is really critical and important, but it's still early. So what I think of when I think about sort of, my day to day is building the tools that people can have to sort of control access and to express their preferences, building a marketplace that allows you to sort of like carry those preferences through and carry the provenance that does exist through. And then I'm like constantly looking around for like more innovation to sort of get to your like the core part of your question, which is how do you make sure that high quality content rises to the top? How do you make sure that it's not just new sort of AI generated summaries that people then try to sell access to the AI generated summary versus the actual original? Our CEO Matthew Prince likes to say that people are reading a derivative, and so how do you keep value back to the original? Still early, so if people have ideas or things they've seen, I would truly love to see them or hear about them.
Luke from the Washington Post has a question that a lot of people are upvoting. So, Luke, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it? Are you?
Yeah, sure. And I think like my question is more thinking about 2 years, 5 years in the future. But as I said, I'm struggling to like just wrap my head around if pay-per-crawl can be a stream of revenue for publishers. I'm thinking about something like the Post, but maybe also something like the size of the Banner or the Baltimore Banner or like mid-level publishers. And what type of scale do you think publishers would need to achieve with this to generate revenue equal to something like 10% of subscription revenue? And what would be some indicators, industry-wide indicators, early signals that you would see across the industry that would tell you this is going to take off and this is going to be a meaningful stream of revenue?
Yeah, great question, Luke. And the honest answer is I don't know. I come at this with like a high degree of confidence in a couple of areas of like, can we think about agent identification, crawler identification, give you the tools to to express those preferences, the data to go along with them, the new ways to express your preferences using sort of AI pref or content signals. Like I feel really, high degrees of confidence around those areas and a real like openness to what the actual model will be in the future. And so paper crawl is one of our first experiments here. And I am excited about it, excited to see some of the early data that we're getting, but I'm also very open that there will be different and more experiments that need to happen here. And I don't know which one will win that's out there. You see folks Bill Gross's company ProRata, which is thinking about sort of not like the paper crawl side, but more of like the paper use inside of the model. I think that's an incredibly fascinating model that's out there. One-off partnerships that happen sort of on an aggregate basis. That's an interesting model that happens out there. More sort of like agentic type commerce things that are happening. Lots of innovation happening there. That's an interesting model. So there's a lot, and I don't have like a really bold prediction or vision for this particular one will go out there. What I come with like a high degree of conviction again is that like there needs to be a lot of solutions. There needs to be experimentation, and you as the content creator, the publisher, should be in the driver's seat for what happens. How they actually get manifest and which one wins, I think we're going to see over time.
Yeah, speaking of some of those other things, Madhav, also from London, had some questions about that. You want to unmute and go ahead and ask, Madhav?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for doing this. I think I sort of have two questions. One is really what the differences are between what Cloudflare is trying to do with what Tollbit's trying to do with what Microsoft has announced.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is a higher order question, which is, do you really believe there's enough demand? There's a lot of supply, but I'm not sure there is enough demand for a marketplace to work.
Yeah, so the first part of on the Tollbit side, great startup, met them many times, so kudos for them to sort of working out there. They just do a payment gate side. What we realized a long time ago is that that doesn't work if you don't have everything up beforehand. So you've seen them sort of announce a couple partnerships and integrations with other companies that are out there. You have to have the identification and the actual network level ability to sort of send and receive traffic, and then block or allow traffic. Without those things, the identification and the blocking and allowing, the payment gates won't ultimately scale or won't sort of ultimately matter because they're really easy to circumvent. And so that's why we like literally took WebBot auth and made it, standards, because we recognized that we needed the ability at scale to begin to recognize these payments. And so we pushed that out there. So sort of thinking about Tollbit as sort of one part of the stack, us thinking sort of the full part of the stack of like, how do you get your content from point A to point B? How do you actually allow or disallow traffic? Tollbit actually integrates with our stack. You can actually go to their developer documentation. If you're a Cloudflare customer, you can then they pull all of our logs in. So they rely upon others to sort of pull in the logs and pull in the actual data. So, but again, great startup. Excited to see what they're doing there. Microsoft, long history with MSN in terms of working with content creators and publishers there. So I'm excited to see new innovation there. And then the last part of your question is like, is the supply is there? Will the demand be there? I think we're going to see. I do remain pretty excited about the innovation that can happen here. And again, I think about it as I really try to like anchor into my personal consumer experiences, which is where I'm in chat, I'm in Gemini, I'm in Claude, and I'm asking these questions. And I gravitate towards the solution that gives me the most up-to-date, the most relevant information for my particular use case. You're seeing in more narrow or sort of slightly tangential industries like software, development, incredible explosion of things like Devin and obviously Cursor that are out there that are sort of like pulling in different models and then sort of like deeply embedded into different workflows. That's because of like real demand for that aspect here. I think we're going to see similar things in the consumer side of demand for the most interesting, most up-to-date information. So I don't know if it's going to come from like one or two big companies supplying all of the demand. I think it's going to be all the consumers in the other end of that, right? And so what has to happen though is we have to like move from the Napster world to the Spotify world, where that content is just like easy for anyone to grab and to actually make it to where it's easy for anyone to grab and pay for. And I think that's the part that I think about a lot.
Thanks. Just for full disclosure, I was advising and worked at a company called Human Native that was trying to build this, and I think the demand side is the hardest part, frankly. So I wish you the best of luck. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Krish from Dapier has a question, which I was also curious about MCP and other ways to have AI interact. Do you want to go ahead and unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, hey, Will, how are you, buddy? How's it going?
Hey, Chris, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah, no, we talked about this in the past. I thought it would be interesting to bring that up here. How do you see? Obviously, there's paper crawl, there's training. There's what the frontier models are doing today and how they actually crawl actively. Publishers' websites, but there's also, at the point of inference, right? At the point of queries, their monetization around that. And we talked a bit about it, but it would be share your perspective and your latest perspective as well. So.
Well, I love what you all are doing in this area. And I think there's a ton of innovation here to think about how do you allow the world to access the content that you create, not just through, scraping an HTML page, but sort of doing something to transform it and make it sort of as usable and useful as possible to not only foundation model companies, but to agents writ large. And maybe those agents are sort of run through the larger foundation model companies, maybe they're run solo, but I think there's something incredibly fascinating there. So, the synopsis is, again, what you're building, what others are building, like metered MCP access. When we announced sort of
That's
the
right.
X42 Foundation last week or 2 weeks ago now, one of the demos that we set up was the ability to sort of have like paid tool calling inside of an MCP server. I'm incredibly bullish on that.
That's right.
And I think,
Cool.
and so then how do you take, so the question that I think for a lot of the folks here is like, okay, how do I take my content that I'm creating and then transform it into make it accessible via not only just, the HTML side, but these different mechanisms that allow these sort of new different ways to interact with my content. And I do think things like, on the simplistic side, just access to the markdown version of your files, but the more interesting side, sort of metered, paid for MCP servers, one click, create an API from this, new forms of search. That's where I think a lot of the innovation is going to happen. Again, no one's cracked it yet, like fully, but I look at that and I feel like you can start to feel the future there. So yeah, I remain very bullish about that.
We did do a
Cool. Thank you.
about MCPs a couple months back, and there was a startup that's working on monetized MCP as an open standard in order to create protocols to do payments for MCP requests and all that. So that could be interesting. I don't know if that's something you all would get into as well.
In particular, with their standards that are out there, we think again with the X42 stuff, we think that's one possible avenue. There are a couple other ones. There's a lot of commerce standards that are sort of now that we're both working on and some we're just implementing. We tend to be a little bit of Switzerland in that world where we want to just like make sure that there is a standard that everyone can sort of implement because these things work really well when everyone's speaking the same language. And so, yeah, I'm, even wait another month, we're going to see a lot more stuff come out in this area.
Dustin, would you like to go ahead and unmute and ask your question about?
Sure. Hey, well, thank you, everybody. This is incredible. From the news side, I'm in some threads where people are just wondering about AI visibility. And then there's a lot of talk about SEO and AI and optimizing all this stuff. I'm curious, can you help with that? Because everyone keeps saying that they can't find anything that's really working and questioning methodologies. And I don't know, any clarity here?
Yeah, I think so again, we do a lot of different things at Cloudflare. One of the things we do is we have a developer platform where if you want to build a net new application, you could build on top of us. And so we have our developer documentation. We want that developer documentation to be in every foundation model as quickly as possible. If I make an update to our dev docs, I want it to be in every single foundation model company. So when somebody says, what's the best place to build a web app? Or, should I use Cloudflare storage versus somebody else's? One of them say like, yeah, use Cloudflare. And so we think about that like as the service provider side of like, how do we make sure we show up in there? So we hear that sort of use case loud and clear because we experience it in part of what we do. I think there are a couple things that I've seen that are interesting, some that are sort of a little bit unknown. One is, can you tell when a foundation model company or when a crawler, GPT bot or Claude bot or Google via sort of Google Extended, which is an interesting use case, when they're crawling your site, how often they're crawling your site, what are they accessing? Are they accessing the marked-in version? All that we can do, right? And we can do today. So we have a whole metrics tab that allows you to sort of get a lot of detailed information into there. That's stuff that can happen today. I'm investing a lot of, time and resources into making that as great as possible. Literally an hour ago, I pushed out a new update that shows more information there, which I think is really helpful. But there's a second part of your question, which I think is even more critical, which is harder, which is how often am I showing up in these responses? And that's something that, to the best of my knowledge, has not been sort of shown by the foundation model companies or the sort of larger LLMs yet, right? They haven't said, like, oh, log into your like the equivalent of like the Google Search Console that's out there. Will they at some point? I'd imagine so, because I think it's going to be pretty interesting, pretty critical. I know there are a couple of startups that are out there that are working in this space, and it's interesting how they operate. They basically spin up remote browsers across the world, and they're just running queries. And then they're just cataloging those. So it's not that different than what people have done with SEO for a long time. And now they're just targeted towards like when I ask Chat or I ask Claude or I ask Gemini, like tell me X, Y, and Z, how often is my response coming up? So that's happening. Will that door get closed? Will people try to build it themselves? I don't know. I think it's a fascinating world. And we're seeing more people innovate there. But I think it's going to be incredibly important as people think about commerce, content, and how you show up in there. Again, we think we're somewhat neutral in this world. Like if you want to write for the super intelligence, if you want to write for human eyes only, your prerogative. We want to help you in both scenarios.
Scott Klein, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, you were talking about payment standards, and so my ears perked up as I've been doing some reading about this. I am curious which ones you say you're Switzerland, which is great, but what are you paying attention to? I know there's ACP, which I think is the Stripe one,
Yes.
and AP2. One of them is the Stripe one of them is the Google one.
Yes.
Like, which ones are you paying attention to? Which ones do you think make sense in our space?
Yes, and
Not
yes.
just for payments, but for pay-per-crawl, but also things like subscriptions and stuff like that.
100%. I get the acronyms confused because they're all like quite close. And so is it A2A or A2P? And I should know them, but I don't off the top of my head. ACP is the one which is either Agentic Commerce Protocol or I forget the exact one. That's with Stripe and OpenAI. They announced Google's came out 3-4 weeks ago as sort of an extension of A2A, and shame on me, I can't think of what they actually called it, but it's sort of closely tied with their A2A. Interestingly, Google's also, they're thinking about making sure that works with the A2A protocol, which is sort of their agent-to-agent protocol, and MCP servers, which is the model context protocol. So we are awash in potential standards here right now. And we obviously are working with Coinbase on the X402 side, which is another one that's out there. Again, we think there are multiple paths here. Ultimately, some will sort of fall to the wayside and a couple will win. But the ones I'm paying most closely attention to are those kind of three. X402, because it's sort of at that HTTP level of the stack, we think really important. The ACP from Google and Stripe, from OpenAI and Stripe, really interesting. Google's really interesting. A couple others that are sort of on the horizon that I'm seeing, but those three would be the ones that like are top of radar for me. I'm sure I'm missing some. Will those be the ones that ultimately sort of like break through? I don't know. But it's also interesting how you start to see standards just sometimes there's just, the fact that MCP is out there and has become the de facto standards, a pretty fascinating experiment. And so on the agent side and the commerce side, will one of those win? I tend to think so, but it might take a little while.
We're almost up on time. I'm gonna take the prerogative of tossing it to Paul Chung, my co-conspirator on many projects relating to AI with Hacks Hackers, to ask the last question.
Hey,
Paul.
Will, the reality is that most journalism CEOs and even editor-in-chief does not understand any of this, right? As far as the way they think about monetizing is like, how do we sell to OpenAI for a multi-year subscription? In fact, we see how we are repeating this again and again, just really selling our entire archive of content. away for pennies. When you talk to these partners, publishers, how do you get them to understand that technology is now the business and there's a different way of monetizing? Because I just don't see any of the conversation on the business side is nearly as interesting as the one that we're having right now.
I've been honestly blown away by the level of sophistication from the folks that I'm speaking to on sort of the publishing side, and the content creator side. But that's all obviously paired with the fact that it feels like you all or these folks are being bombarded on all sides by really an incredibly rapidly changing ecosystem and landscape. And so the stress levels are, I would understandably, through the roof. And so I would crumble under that amount of stress. So I have a large degree of empathy as well. That's for it. But I really have been blown away by sort of not only the sophistication and the openness to new mechanisms, but also just the recognition that the way we consume content is rapidly changing. And, I imagine it's going to go through another incredibly rapid evolution over this next year. It's trite to say this. It's been said so many times, but like I really do feel like we are in a faster moving technological innovation space than we've been in my entire career. And I think it's only going to continue. So I think, the number one thing that I tell folks and that I also hear from them is that like everyone's just got to buckle up. Like it's going to be an interesting ride, and we've got to find a lot of different things. I think staying like pretty like both proud and recognizing the value that you do create is really important. Local news, incredibly important, for many different reasons. The content that people create in different verticals, different areas, incredibly important. And so I think not losing sight of the value that people create is one really important foundational aspect, because that's what's going to drive this next step. And then so I think it's one area. But then two, I would just say is like being open to some level of experimentation that doesn't fully set the precedent over time that's what it is, right? Knowing that maybe it's a paid MCP server. Is it going to pop and work? Is it going to fail? I don't know, right? You got to try. And so I think being open to that level of experimentation that doesn't fully take you down a one-way door, I think is a really important aspect of what needs to happen now as well.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. Fun fact, which I should have mentioned earlier, Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, owns the local newspaper in his hometown of Park City, Utah. So he has an understanding of these issues at its heart as well. I really want to thank Will for appearing with us. And speaking of what he's saying, we are trying to help people keep aware of all these changes as they're happening, encouraging people to play around, try new things. Hacks Hackers is a nonprofit organization, and we welcome all of you to come to our events, to sign up for our newsletter at hackshackers.org. It's great seeing you all today. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Fantastic to be here.